Good to go.
All right. Here we are back in beautiful Las Vegas at the Space. It's a wonderful place. Not only do they have this amazing podcast studio, it's a beautiful venue out there, right outside that doorway over there. We've had Killswitch Engage do a small show here. We had Sacred Reich do a show, Armored Saints coming. So if you need a venue for anything, a show, a party, a wedding, please visit the Space in beautiful Las Vegas. And we get to welcome in one of my favorite guitar players, one of the best blues guitar players I've ever seen in my entire life, here in Las Vegas as well. Mr. Stoney Curtis, how are you, sir?
Brian, I am great, and it's a real pleasure and an honor to do this with you.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. And talking Kiss, we talked, okay, we got to do old school Kiss. Haven't done any old school Kiss yet. Don't worry, there'll be way more than this. They're a favorite band when I was like 14, 15 years old. But I asked you what you wanted to talk about, early Kiss, and you immediately said Detroit Rock City. Why this song?
Yeah, I think Detroit Rock City is the, if I'm rating Kiss songs, I mean they're all number 1, 2, 3 for me. But Detroit Rock City, I think, is the quintessential Kiss song. The great Paul Stanley vocal, the production, the story, the guitars. The dum dum. It's just so dramatic. So I had to go with Detroit Rock City just because I think. And obviously, this is my introduction to Kiss. Hearing Detroit Rock City the first time, hearing Kiss for the first time, it was Detroit Rock City. So I think I have to go with Detroit Rock City. So many that you can go with, but...
Yeah, it's a great choice. I mean, I love it too, but I come from a little bit of a different background. Like I first heard them on Dress to Kill, actually, on the radio in LA. So I became a massive fan. And the first concert I ever went to was right before this, February of 1976, on the Alive tour. So I was into all that stuff and into Kiss Alive. And then this record came out, and it was a little bit different. I mean, Bob Ezrin produced it. I was very familiar with Bob from Alice Cooper. I love the old Alice Cooper stuff. But I wasn't sure what he was going to do with Kiss. And I love the record. Trust me, I listened to it probably for 10 days straight, nothing but this every day for 4 or 5 hours, avoiding homework or whatever. But it was a little bit different when I first heard it because it was the first really produced Kiss record. So it took me a minute, but once I got kind of comfortable with that, of course, it's phenomenal. And yeah, this is probably that one of the heavier Kiss songs at that point in time as well. Just the riff that's a heavy metal riff. I don't care what you say.
Sure. Well, yeah, and the arrangement as well is far beyond really anything that they were doing. I mean, I always kind of look at, and I still do, as just punk rock. Especially those first few albums. It's 3, 4 chords, dun dun dun. It's heavy. Great little hooks. And Ace was phenomenal.
Yep.
Back then. Destroyer is a big one.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the arrangements because obviously Bob Ezrin had a huge impact on that. He did on Alice Cooper and certainly did on Kiss. You could tell that it's I remember when it came out because there was always this battle of Kiss not being like, Kiss and Aerosmith. And Aerosmith was the band that all the critics and, they're so much more musical. And I remember when there's like, I go to the record store and buy these Kiss records all the time. And I bought a bunch of other stuff. And the guys at the record store knew me. And they're like, why are you buying this Kiss stuff? Like, it's not any good. I go, are you kidding me? This band's amazing.
Right.
But this one was definitely a step up production-wise for them. And I think they went with Ezrin because of what he had done with Alice Cooper. And they wanted to kind of, get a really well-produced record in there. And they certainly got it with a whole bunch of hits.
Yeah, and it was over the top. For me, this was my introduction to Kiss. So I didn't really have anything to base
preconceived
notions, right? But same with me. The first music I really had listened to was Alice Cooper, Killer. Like I've told you, the Dead Babies still freaks me out. But Under My Wheels, da 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 da. I was like, wow, I love it.
Halo of Flies. We talked about that on
absolutely
the show. Amazing song.
And then Elton John was a big one for me as well. My sister and I we had this love affair with Elton John. So I was really into that kind of music, and the whole Elton John thing, the glasses, the outfits. And Alice Cooper was theatrical, so I was kind of attracted to that already. So when I was given this album, you're looking at it, you're going, wow, what is this?
The great Ken Kelly.
Yeah. So then you just you put it on, and it's just it's so cinematic, and you can just, even Detroit Rock City, I love the song because, they're telling this story, and you can really just kind of play it out in your head, and the whole album just kind of just goes through this. It's in my mind, you're watching these stories come to life. It was really a moment for me.
Yeah, a couple things about what you just said. First of all, it's interesting you mentioned Elton John, because that was me too. Like, my first favorite artist before Kiss was Elton John. Like, I got in early from the radio and just like got really into it. I thought, because it was really well crafted songs. I was like 11 years old, so what do I know about songs? But I just loved the songs, and there was some heaviness in there too, some guitars that I was just learning to really get into, and I loved all that Elton John stuff. And then came along Kiss, and I first time I heard Kiss, like, okay, Elton, I love you, but Kiss is now number one. But it's interesting too what you mentioned about the stories on this record, because that was another big departure for Kiss, because pretty much the first three records just them talking about girls.
Right.
And that was pretty much it. There's no stories, just girls. A couple of weird songs here and there, but mostly girls. So this was a big departure for them. Especially the first song is, it's a whole story about concerts, and there's a thing going on. There's still girl stuff in here, but a lot of God of Thunder and a lot of stuff that wasn't really that way for them. So lyrically it was a bit different. I think it was them kind of trying to prove, like, hey, because a lot of people were Kiss, they're not not good musically.
Yeah, they can't play.
They can't play the songs. But I think look, they've all these people have been proven wrong. They said the same thing about AC/DC, and that went really well as well. But I think it was them kind of prove to people we can write mature songs and really good songs, and certainly very heavy. And I mean, Detroit Rock City, that's a heavy metal riff there. I mean, so much of Kiss's riffs are metal, and that one is really heavy.
Yeah, especially dum dum. It's just so the open E and the 8 dum dum. I'm just that's just power rock and roll right there. So.
Yeah, we talk a lot about 70s stuff in here. That's because I grew up in the 70s. But that's the foundation of heavy metal, is all these bands. You cannot talk to, and we had, Scott Ian on talking about AC/DC recently. Kiss is another massive influence for him. And pretty much most of the metal bands that came in the 80s were all massively influenced by Kiss. Pretty much everybody. Sure. So this is the foundation of where heavy metal began. And it's about the riffs. Like, when you listen to Kiss riffs or you listen to Aerosmith riffs, like, those are metal riffs. I know they want to call themselves rock and roll and whatever, but that's the forebearing of metal. That's how metal became. And to me, all these bands were heavy metal in the 70s.
Sure.
Nobody, aside from Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, nobody wanted to be called heavy metal because it was a bad word in the 70s. But all these, we talked about Alice Cooper earlier. Like, some of that stuff, Halo of Flies, the guitar riffs on there are, as I argue, as heavy as Black Sabbath is. It's amazing.
It's all very dark and heavy, and it just has this whole, like I said, the spooky vibes. These albums have these vibes to them, this kind of energy, and it's I've always been just obsessed with it.
And phenomenal album cover there. Get into the shot there for you, those of you watching it. The other thing too is the album cover.
Yeah.
And, Kiss Alive is an amazing album cover. But this one, Ken Kelly, one of my all-time favorite artists. I didn't really know much about him when this record came out. I just know, like, oh, my God, this piece of art, it looks like it's real. And it's not. And, of course, became a huge fan of his. We got to work with him. He actually did a custom Grim Reaper for our 20th anniversary box set, which for me was like a dream working with Ken Kelly. And there's a great, if you haven't seen it yet, this is Claudio Bergaman, who's a album artist himself. He's done the last couple of Judas Priest albums and a bunch of stuff. He's got this amazing series with Dennis Wolich, who's the one who created all the artwork for all the Kiss records. It's on YouTube, and he did, like, from pretty much from the beginning all the way till almost the end of Kiss. He did all the artwork. Phenomenal YouTube stories. So if you guys are Kiss fans, it's worth doing the rabbit hole to go down and see this stuff. Just put Claudio Bergaman Kiss in YouTube and it'll come up.
Yeah, and they go through all of them. It's really
and there's crazy stories about this one. There's an original version of this that's different colors and different costumes, because I guess they originally were going to have different costumes and they changed to these costumes. So Ken Kelly had to redo the whole cover again, basically.
Right. Yeah, they I think on the remastered one that they did 10 years ago or so, they had the original album cover with the Alive outfits on. So
yeah, pretty amazing. But that's the other thing that I of course, the first thing you see when you buy a record, when back in those days, was you see the album cover. That's a
Exactly.
big thing. I guess this album going to be good. I saw the cover. I go, this has to be good. This cover's
Right.
way too good not to be good. I just love that. It's probably my favorite image of Kiss back there. Maybe even more so than Alive. I love the Alive shot because it's, again, the first concert I went to. But
Yeah.
but this it just looks so cool, and they do look like, I was never a comic book guy really, but they do look like superheroes, and the whole thing is so cool.
That was it for me as well. I wasn't a big comic book guy, but when I was handed that album, and you look at that and you just go, and they play guitar too?
Yeah, right.
I'm in. I'm in.
Gene is a little happy on that cover though, but that's okay. That's okay. It's really good, and the whole record really is great. But what's interesting about this record was obviously a huge success for Kiss. The song "Beth" of all things became this monster hit for them, which you wouldn't really expect. Some weird ballad by this heavy metal band that it became massively huge, but it's huge. But the interesting thing for me is, and there's a lot. I mean, they've all covered it in their books, and everybody talked about it. But they just did the one record with Bob Ezrin,
Right.
and then that was it. It was interesting what they had to say about it, because as much as they liked the record, and obviously it was at that point massively huge and successful, but they kind of wanted to get back to the more rock and roll raw roots, which of course they did with the next two, Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, with Eddie Kramer.
Right. Yeah, and Rock and Roll Over for me is probably my favorite Kiss studio album.
Same here.
And for me, the reason why is to me it's the return of Ace, and it's the return of Ace at it's the natural progression from Alive to Rock and Roll Over, right? Because on Alive, he's really on fire, and he's really coming into his own. And Destroyer, obviously the playing and stuff is great, but it's more scripted, and it's kind of laid out in parts.
Well, yeah, and as the story goes, he was not in the best of shape when making this record. In fact, I think it's Flaming Youth that he's not even playing on that song.
There's maybe Sweet Pain, I think.
Yeah, Sweet Pain was one of the ones he didn't play guitar on at all. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because I didn't really think about this, because I'm not a guitar player, obviously. But when I think back on it, it's like Ace is still great on this record, but you're right, it wasn't the Ace of the previous stuff. That's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah. So you think because it was more scripted, the songwriting?
Well, I just think that the parts were more thought out and more musical, where I think Bob wrote stuff on the piano, and Bob I think came up with a lot of the parts that they played, especially that solo in Detroit Rock City it's all Bob Ezrin. He crafted that.
You can tell, yeah.
So it's they're crafted, and like I said, I mean, all the playing is great, and the tones are great, the sound is great, but it's not that unleashed Ace that we heard on Alive, and that we would then get in Rock and Roll Over. Some of those those Ace climbs that really came. They started to really kind of show themselves in Rock and Roll Over, and like he was peaking kind of at that point for me.
That's interesting. I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I've always been a massive Ace Frehley fan. I think he's just so unique. His playing is amazing, but he just, like, no one can sound like him. And even when Tommy Thayer came into the band, I love Tommy, great guy, great player, but it just didn't sound the same. Just the tone of the way not only the way he played leads, but the way he played rhythms. And I remember watching Ace Frehley do a solo show, I forget how long, maybe 10 years ago now. And I was like, that's how Kiss used to sound, was because he's got that tone, not just, like I said, not just the leads, but the rhythms too. And I kind of missed that when he left Kiss.
Sure. I believe that guitar players are regional in the way they sound, in a way. So, a guy from the Midwest, like Gary Richrath or Nugent or something, they have a style that kind of fits in that region. It's kind of where, and New
like
York,
a more earthy style, maybe.
Yeah, it's.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think some of these New York guys, especially like Ace, they had this kind of punk rock, and it's just kind of this lazy, the way they bend and the way Ace would lay into it. And Texas guys have a thing, but I think that the way Ace played, it's hard to duplicate that, because he was naturally just had this slurry kind of thing, right? And Tommy's great. I mean, obviously, and he plays the parts perfect, but it's not that whatever it is
Yeah,
that
it's a unique
thing.
style. I kind of equate it a little bit to the way Dave Lombardo plays drums for Slayer. Like Dave plays a little off. He just like a slight bit off. And whenever I love Paul Bostaph, and Paul's an amazing drummer. But the first few times that he played with Slayer, I was like, I didn't feel right on the Dave stuff. And then Dave came back for a while, and Dave left, and then Paul came back again. And I'll never forget they were playing. I believe never forget. I believe it was this festival, but I think it was Bloodstock in the UK. And I purposely went, and I always watch shows in the crowd. I don't like to be on side stage. I'm a fan.
Well,
I want to be in the audience.
Same way.
I can't do it side stage. I hate it. So anyway, so I was on Carrie's side because I like to be on Carrie's side, but I was all the way behind. I made sure that I was to the point where the PA was in the way of Paul, so I couldn't see him. And he nailed it. Like, he nailed it. So I went to backstage and say hi to Carrie after. I go, I got to say, this is the first time I've seen you guys with Paul where I didn't miss Dave. And he said, well, you know why? Because Paul actually sat and listened to the way Dave played those songs and listened and kind of copied his style, which is hard to do, I think, for a drummer. Same thing with a guitar player like Ace to do that. So it's really interesting that he did that. But I think that's what makes these people so unique is their playing is just, nobody plays like Ace.
Nobody, yeah. And I've done a couple of Kiss tribute albums for our charity that we do. So I was able to really spend time with these songs and really kind of get into them where people go, oh, those songs are simple, they're easy. I'm like, no, they're not. Try playing them. You can play them, but playing them right is a whole nother thing. And especially on Detroyer, there's so many, the riff in Flaming Youth when they're doing the guitar solo, it changes 2 or 3 times. So there's so much little intricacies about Kiss music that you think is simple, but until you really get in and try to replicate it, then it opens up your eyes to how good these guys were and how well crafted those songs were.
And that's the beauty of really great music, to make it sound simple.
Right.
Where it just sounds simple. It's amazing, and the riffs are great, but it is fairly simple, which I think is can be wide-reaching or whatever you say. But it's almost like seeing a great basketball player or a great hockey player make something really difficult look easy.
Right.
And they're doing the same thing where it's like they make it sounds easy, but it's really not that easy.
No, it's not. And we spent a lot of time trying to get it right. And outside of Ace, one of the big things to copy is Peter, because Peter also,
he's the one that gets the most grief about not being a great drummer.
And I don't understand it because Peter, he's not John Bonham and he's not Tommy Aldridge or he's not that that, but he had a swing to him that a lot of guys they can't get it. They can't get that Peter swing. It was and I guess too different influences of where he came from.
Mm-hmm.
He's more into Gene Krupa and some
mm-hmm.
jazz stuff. Where it wasn't just exclusively Bonham influence or something. So
one of the things I've learned doing this show, which it's a lot of fun to do, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. One thing I've learned though in talking to drummers that I never really thought about, I always thought, and I consider myself a heavy metal historian. I think I know what's going on. I've done research and stuff, and metal came from the blues mostly, clearly a massive classical influence, and there's a few things here and there, but talking to drummers. And again, Dave Lombardo being one of them, where one of his biggest influences is jazz. Mm-hmm. And you start talking to drummers, and a lot of these drummers, like you mentioned with the swing, come from a jazz background. And I've kind of looked at it differently now, where jazz does have a pretty big influence on metal, mostly in the drumming, where you talk about that swing that
mm-hmm.
that some people get. I never really thought about that before. I was just like, Jazz, really? I love jazz, but
sure.
I wouldn't equate it to being a big influence on metal. But now I see.
Right. Yeah, and like I said too, especially blues music. All of this stuff is just blues.
Yeah.
Hit the 1, go to the 4.
Black Sabbath, who really invented it, was a blues band.
Was a blues band, right? Yeah. So many of these guys were. So, yeah.
By the way, my other argument about how influential Kiss was, and again, you can talk to all these big metal stars, but one of the guys that really was over the top Ace Frehley fan was Dimebag.
Yes.
He was unbelievable. I mean, we would talk for hours about Ace Frehley his playing, and we listened to the Kiss records, and he was obsessed with that. And he obviously had a lot of other influences too, but I think Ace was probably the biggest influence on him as a guitar player, and specifically, I think, as I mentioned earlier, where Ace has a tone, like Dime got a tone. And
Sure.
that's when you know somebody's really great, where you can listen to 3 seconds of a riff or something and go, that's Pantera, because that's Dimebag.
Right.
That's Kiss because of Ace, or that's Tony Iommi, whatever it is.
Yeah, and they're, Ace Frehley is the sound of Kiss. I mean, that guitar, especially back then, that's what's in your face. That's what you're hearing is that. So, yeah, I agree 100%. But still, like with this album too, one of the great influences on it as well was how they, the landscapes, how they colored the album, right? So it's not just, and this has been a huge influence on me, especially on the record I'm doing now, to where it's crafting this soundscape intertwined with the heavy riffs, right? So there's little ear candy or little harmony guitars going on, or little thematic pieces underneath it that this is full of.
Yeah, I mean, Ezra was always really great at that. That's why it's fun to listen to a lot of his productions in headphones, because there's little things you didn't really notice before. And the other thing I too wanted to mention going into this is so obviously, Kiss, amazing band. We've talked about all this, but another guy that gets not a lot of credit for his riff writing for me is Paul Stanley. I think Paul Stanley writes the heaviest riffs. I mean, Detroyer City. I mean, that riff is super heavy. You go
Love
back
Gun, yeah. I mean,
Love Gun. So much of the heavier stuff they wrote. I mean, Gene's got the heavier vocals and song structures and song titles and things. But Paul was always look back at the stuff he wrote. I'm like, wow, you don't really expect, because Paul's got the
sure
fluty image and kind of all the fun guy and all this, but he was like a master riff maker.
Yeah, and Paul, next to Ace, Paul's probably my favorite guy, I guess. Paul's a great guitar player. Like I said, and all those riffs, the Keith Richards thing. I mean, da 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 da. That's all. Paul Stanley stuff. It's almost like it's a Keith Richards thing, but it's almost become like a Paul Stanley thing. Well, do the Paul Stanley right there. Da, 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 da. Like that, So, yeah, and talking about this album too, with all the soundscapes and stuff, it's like little things that you hear in it. The thing that I always wondered about was in Flaming Youth. Flaming Youth will set the world on fire. What is that sound? And when we did that song on the tribute album, you start listening. It's the tires screeching. It's the tires screeching from the end of Detroit Rock City.
Oh wow!
So it's Flaming Youth will set the world on fire. I'm going. That's what it is. It's So all these little things in there.
Production tricks. I love it.
Yeah.
And that song is just so great. And Paul, but I was always a Gene fan. Gene was always my guy, just because he was the demon and the evil. So and Ace would be second. So Paul was always third. But when I go back and listen again because I've listened to this Kiss stuff over and over again for forever basically. But I was like, yeah, man, Kiss, like Paul did write so many of the heavy riffs. I've talked to him a few times. He's good friends with my buddy Chris Santos, but I don't really ever want to talk music because I'm sure it's the last thing he wants to talk about. Like, tell me how you wrote that riff or whatever. But I would always love to ask, like, where that came from. Because again, these bands that came out in the 70s, they didn't have previous bands to listen to create this sort of music.
Right.
Where now with Metallica and Slayer, you've got all the 70s, Sabbath, Priest, Kiss, everything. So it's interesting where they came up. But reading all the books, because I've read everybody's book, and a lot of these guys that became metal bands, rock bands, whatever you want to call them, in the 70s, all wanted to do something heavier and darker than what was previous, than what the Stones or the Beatles were doing. So it's really interesting where that kind of came from, and that's where that begat all of these bands. And Kiss, what you say about the image, and I think that's the same thing with Alice Cooper we talked about earlier, where Alice, his music gets not as important because of the show, and the image is so important. You can say even the same thing about Guar, basically, but the music was still a huge thing for me, for Kiss, because I started listening to it. I saw the pictures, but you couldn't see them live until much later.
Yeah, and that was the thing back then too. Was that
what I was going to say is the music that drew me in more than the imagery.
No, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, if they didn't have any songs, they just would have went away. You never, you know what I mean? But but Black Diamond, Deuce, Rock and Roll All Night, Detroit Rock City, Love. I mean, they're staples in hard rock music. You know, and just so well done. And yeah, and other stuff like this album too. It's almost like a bridge between that era of Kiss and then Destroyer came out, and it's like I kind of take Destroyer and I just kind of put it on a shelf as its own piece of art in a way, right? And then Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. But there's like that transitional period where Paul Stanley turned into another animal after Destroyer, right? Like he just, to me, 1977 Paul Stanley is right up there with the greatest hard rock singers of all time. Of that, right in that pocket where something happened on this album. Maybe it's the confidence, maybe it's learning, maybe it's being pushed, but he turned it up like another notch.
It's definitely all that. It's interesting you say that because he talks about that in his book where he was always very shy and he couldn't hear, and when he had the whole ear thing going on, and he was always really shy. And I think once they got here, once the Kiss, because before Alive, I mean that was basically going to be it. Like, that record wasn't big. They were just going to go be business guys or so.
Right. It would have faded away. Yeah.
But it became big. And then I think, being in the studio with somebody like Bob Ezrin, you're going to learn stuff, whether obviously they didn't want to work with him afterwards, but clearly he learned a lot. And it's interesting to say that because I think you're right, because he did on those subsequent records was like a different Paul Stanley.
Yeah. Yeah. It became like, it's like, it was almost the evolution of Kiss Alive. It's like, because Kiss Alive, he's so great on that, but just the little tone in his voice changed a little bit, and he got a little bit higher and that more power. But yeah, I don't know where that came from. Yeah, but maybe it's just confidence and learning stuff and going for it. It really paid off.
Yeah, and those bands, which is interesting also about all the bands that came from the 70s, most of them, I mean, there's exceptions, obviously, Black Sabbath for sure, but a lot of those bands didn't really come to become as great as they were. It took 3 or 4 records to do it.
Sure.
Thin Lizzy's another one.
Right.
There's a bunch of bands, and even Kiss. Like, I love the early Kiss records, but clearly, Alive, leading into Destroyer, leading it into Rock and Roll, or leading into Love Gun. That's the body of Kiss work. I think most people are like, that's the Kiss that is the Kiss.
Right. That's why, we always call Ace Frehley the reason. That's the reason why so many of us are here, because it was Kiss, but then I was attracted to the guitar, and this was my guy, and then, Rock and Roll Over. So, I mean, he's such an influence on everybody that kind of came that next generation, my generation, where we were 10, 11, 12 years old. This became, the reason why I want to pick up a guitar. It was almost like our Beatles.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, dude, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. You mentioned a charity earlier. Let us know what that is.
Yeah, it's called Kiss Night in Las Vegas. I have a charity that I've done now for about 12 years, and we just help raise money for some of the local schools here to put instruments in the rooms where
they are now. So
they're a disaster. So.
Yeah. That's amazing. And where people can find you on social media?
Stoney Curtis 77 at Stoney Curtis. I'm on X and Instagram, Facebook, kind of stuff.
And go to YouTube, put this man's name in, and you will see some amazing stuff. Thanks again for doing this, man.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Cool. All good?